Hanoi University of Medicine before hundreds of Vietnamese doctors, medical lecturers, and students. Let's have a look.
During its 110-year history, this is the first time the Hanoi Medical University has ever received a Nobel Laureate in medicine. The auditorium, with a capacity of 500 seats, were quickly filled. In the beginning of his presentation themed Cancer Prevention as a Challenge for Global Health, Professor Harald Hausen said that the world was progressing slowly in the reduction of cancer mortality, but had not yet made progress in reducing cancer morbidity.
If you look now into the risk factors which have been identified for colon cancer, there's clearly the prime factors are the consumption of so-called red meat and of processed meat, smoked, air-dried, a couple of other types of preparatory steps which are involved, which elevates the risk after long-time consumption for this type of cancer by 20 to 30%.
Many leading Vietnamese cancer experts attended Professor Hausen's presentation. As cancer is becoming a very serious problem in Vietnam, the presentation attracted the attention of all participants. Each year, 150,000 Vietnamese patients are diagnosed with cancer, and more than 75,000 die due to the illness.
Có tới 70% người bệnh đến khám và chữa bệnh ở giai đoạn muộn. Ở đây là cái lý do chính giải thích vì sao cái tỷ lệ chữa khỏi bệnh ung thư của Việt Nam chưa ngang bằng so với các nước. Song song các bệnh truyền nhiễm được từng bước đẩy lùi, thì các bệnh không nhiễm trùng, trong đó ung thư thì đang có xu hướng tăng lên một cách nhanh chóng. Nguyên do thứ nhất là do thuốc lá. Chúng ta biết là ở Việt Nam thì cái tỷ lệ thuốc lá rất cao, khoảng 49 tới 5% ở nam giới và khoảng 2% ở nữ giới. Cái thứ hai là tuổi thọ trung bình của người Việt Nam được tăng lên, mà ung thư thì lại hay mắc ở cái lứa tuổi về sau này. Cái thứ ba là cái dinh dưỡng chưa thực sự hợp lý, kết hợp với một số chất bảo quản thực phẩm mà chúng ta chưa thể kiểm soát hết được.
Professor Hausen's presentation inspired the teachers and students of Hanoi Medical University, including Lê Ngọc Mây, a recent graduate who became a medical intern at the oncology department of Hanoi-based Bạch Mai Hospital.
Nó là một cái động lực cho chúng em, những cái người mà trẻ và đang rất là có cái tinh thần tìm hiểu. Em rất là muốn là có thể phấn đấu để mà, bởi vì rằng như thầy hiệu trưởng trường em nói thì là nếu mà các bạn muốn có một cái giải Nobel cho trường Đại học Y Hà Nội thì các bạn hãy bắt đầu ngay từ bây giờ. Em cũng rất là mong em và các bạn là những bác sĩ ung thư mới ra trường thì em rất là muốn sau này mình vẫn cũng có thể có những cái công trình nghiên cứu như thế. Một cái nỗ lực rất là lớn.
Qua cái sự kiện giáo sư đến với nhà trường để chúng tôi khuấy động lên cái lòng yêu say mê khoa học của các em sinh viên của nhà trường, và chúng tôi cũng kích thích các em để các em cũng dám nghĩ, dám làm, cũng dám mơ ước đến cái giải Nobel. Bởi vì chúng ta không mơ ước thì không bao giờ chúng ta đạt đến.
In his presentation, Professor Hausen also said that the consumption of raw or undercooked red meat, mostly beef, can raise the chance of contracting cancer. White meat, specifically the consumption of fried, grilled, or smoked chicken and fish, is considered relatively safe. Changes of lifestyle can help avoid risk factors for cancer development. These changes include giving up on bad habits such as tobacco smoking, no physical exercise, obesity, excessive alcohol consumption, or intensive sun exposure. Another important measure is the primary prevention of cancer by successful treatment of long-lasting infections, for example, hepatitis C or hepatitis B, which is responsible for approximately 80% of liver cancer.
In your presentations before medical lecturers and students in Hanoi as well as Ho Chi Minh City, why did you mention cancer prevention as a challenge for global health?
because I believe that this is the only way how we can really reduce the global burden of cancer. And the one other reason is that I feel at least that cancer prevention or prevention of diseases in a way is not sufficiently taught at medical students in universities, and even the young doctors, they are more trained to cure patients who acquired already disease, which of course is an important issue, but nevertheless they ignore frequently prevention. And when you look around and when you discuss, for instance, at the moment, of course, the papillomavirus vaccine is close to my heart. If you talk to gynecologists and you see from time to time that some of them are not really familiar with the development, that is a bit frustrating. And you need to do more advocacy for these types of preventive measurements in order to reduce the cancer burden. If we would today start to vaccinate globally each young child against hepatitis B virus and high-risk papillomaviruses, we could already prevent at this stage something like 12 to 15% of cancers in females. In males, the rate would be lower.
Can you please quote some of the most frequently asked questions from the public during your lectures?
Well, the most frequently asked questions probably concerns the vaccination against human papillomaviruses. Why this vaccination is only active in persons not yet sexually exposed, sexually active. And the second most frequently asked question was clearly the question, why do you propose that boys should be also vaccinated, since they of course do not develop cervical cancer? And I usually answered, if we would only vaccinate boys, we probably would avoid more cervical cancers in women than only vaccinating women. And the reason is that in most societies globally, the males in the age group between 15 and 25 years have usually more partners than females at the same age. So in a way it is important to vaccinate boys, but this is not the only reason. Clearly there are other reasons, because they also have some other cancers which are due to high-risk papillomaviruses at a lower rate as cervical cancer. And of course, it may lead to an eradication of these viruses in a global vaccination program in a foreseeable period of time.
Is it absolutely necessary to be vaccinated against cervical cancer?
There's nothing absolutely necessary. If a person, for instance, has only one partner and the other partner had only this one partner, then you wouldn't need a vaccination at all, because there's no risk then to acquire these types of infections. But since, unfortunately, this is not true anywhere in the world, the situation is quite different. And so it's indeed, one should strongly recommend the vaccination for teenage girls and boys in order to avoid this.
What can you say about cervical cancer prevention and treatment in the world today? How effective is it?
Well, the vaccination is quite effective. It's at least against the types which are presently in the vaccine, is protective close to 100% of the individuals, at least for time periods, in preventing the precursor lesion of this cancer of up to 9 or 10 years. And it is likely that the vaccine will last for longer periods of time, but this is the only period which is presently covered. I said before that cervical cancer takes 15 to 25 years before it develops after infection, so we don't have statistically significant results yet in the prevention of cervical cancer. As far as cancer, another type of cancer prevention is concerned, of course the pap smear is quite effective in cancer prevention. It leads to the discovery of precursor lesions of this cancer and their surgical removal, which is important. Wherever this is done carefully, 70 to 80% of cervical cancers can be prevented. But it requires, of course, a surgical intervention in order to do this. And it has a disadvantage still that about 20–30% are not discovered under these circumstances. As far as treatment of cervical cancer is concerned, indeed, the standard protocols of treating cervical cancer are either surgery or surgery and radiation, or radiation of this type of cancer. They have been fairly successful, but still today about 1/2 of these females who develop cervical cancer die of this disease, and in many parts of the developing world this percentage is higher than 50%. So there is an urgent need indeed to improve also the therapeutic procedures.
With the medical lecturers and students in Ho Chi Minh City, you said young talented scientists often found out a way of their own, which sometimes might go opposite to that of their mentors. Did I get it right? Is that what you can you please elaborate on that a little bit?
Right, but what I was saying was basically that frequently what happens is that young scientists, due to the pressure to publish in good journals, are frequently forced, particularly the very talented ones, to join very good groups where they foresee that they can publish well and where they can publish in good journals. And this, in many instances, leads to a program later on in their postdoctoral period and subsequently to follow the paths of their mentors. When I started my own studies in science, for 3 years I came to a laboratory where I didn't get any advice, which was a little bit sad, and at the time I didn't like it at all. But looking at it back retrospectively right now, I think it might have been a good period for me, because you could develop some ideas. Clearly many of them were not realistic at all, and clearly I learned that I couldn't follow them. But in a way I could develop some paths which was a little bit out of the mainstream of science, and continued this for quite a long period of time when it was still not in the mainstream of science. Gradually now infections and cancer come into the mainstream as well.
Do you have any specific advice for those young Vietnamese scientists who have also chosen medical research as their lifelong path?
Well, I would say work persistently on an original theme for longer periods of time. Don't get frustrated so much that you skip it completely. Usually even on some sideways there's some interesting data along. And if you get old enough, and try to get old enough, you may even end up with a Nobel Prize.
During the reception held in your honor, the Vietnamese Minister of Health suggested that she would be grateful for your support in the future. Do you have plans to return to Vietnam for any projects or help the Vietnamese medical students in some way?
I'll tell you, it would be delightful for me to return to Vietnam, because I thought it was a very hospitable and beautiful country at the same time. I haven't seen, of course, very much right now due to the visit in 2 cities only, but I certainly would love to see more of the country too, to see some of the historical places who are praised for their beauty, and I'm sure they are beautiful, so it would be quite nice to do it. I do not have any definite plans at this moment, but clearly I would look forward to coming again to this country.
Excellent, so I hope we will see you back. In a developing country like Vietnam, how do you think we should invest in medical studies?
Well, I think a country like Vietnam and many of the Asian countries should invest also to some degree in basic research. They should really, at least, you know, not every country can cover any aspect of science. But I think even for developing countries in Africa or somewhere else in the world, it would be wise, that's at least my opinion, if they concentrate on specific aspects of basic research, try to develop it in an application-oriented way into certain types of directions. So it's also important for the industrial development of the individual countries to do something like this, and also to, in the end, to develop something where they're internationally competitive. I hear frequently arguments that we cannot afford it to finance basic research, so we try to translate research which exists already. I don't believe that this is the right policy, because you cannot rely on data which are obtained somewhere else and collect them. Then they are usually based on a lot of experience in those countries, and they have a much better chance than to progress more rapidly than you can do under those circumstances. So my idea is really there should be some sectors of basic research which need to be supported, just keeping in mind the strengths of the country in certain areas.
So what would you say is the sector that Vietnam should focus on?
This is for me a most difficult question because I'm really not so familiar with the details of the activities here in Vietnam. But I could, particularly as far as medical activities are concerned, I could easily see that, of course, you have here some big medical problems, specifically with infectious diseases. Take dengue fever, for instance, or malaria is still a problem here, not such a big problem, but it is a problem, and a couple of other diseases. So it must be a decision made by your health officials, indeed, and I wouldn't dare to interfere with it from my side.
As a scientist, what principles guide you? What or who inspires you most?
Well, the principle which should guide a scientist are really that they should be critical. They should be critical even against their own results. If something looks too persuasive, that's frequently wrong in the end. And so one needs to really control carefully the studies. In my lifespan, I've experienced a few cases of attempts of frauds, not so much in my own group, but also as an editor of a journal. I saw that a couple of articles which had been submitted were fraudulent, and so it's not a sincere work which has been conducted. And you start to wonder occasionally how many remain undiscovered if you discover a certain number of them. And, but this is, of course, what the other aspects which should characterize a scientist is really an engagement and really the willingness to do something and to contribute something. And also, as I said it before, persistence is another important characteristic, at least from my viewpoint. But I originate from an area in Germany where people are supposed to be a little bit more stubborn and clinching to specific aspects for long periods of time as well.
So what or who would you say inspires you most?
You mean as a person?
It can be a thing as well.
Well, what inspired me as a young person were clearly the reports which I was eagerly reading on some of the great scientists like Robert Koch, Louis Pasteur, and a couple of others. I was eagerly reading those reports, and I really thought that would be a good example for me. Hopefully I could do it similar to them.
That's great. And in all your Nobel speeches, you mentioned your wife and children. What role does your family play in your scientific success?
Well, they, unfortunately, during my lifetime, really, particularly when the children were smaller, I was not sufficiently often at home. I was traveling a bit, but on the whole, they tolerated it quite easily, and all of them made their career. They all three are PhDs by now. One is an MD and PhD, and so in a way, they are quite successful, and I'm proud of them, I must say. I'm also proud of my grandchildren, which there's 3 grandchildren now there. But it's sometimes difficult to combine the family life with the scientific requirements, really. And I guess many scientists feel this the same way as I do.
Thank you so much, Professor Hausen, for spending your absolutely valuable time with us today. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you, and good luck with your future endeavors.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to talk to you.
And that's all we have for this special edition of Talk Vietnam. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you and goodbye for now.